Rain exploded against the glass doors as security guards dragged Adrian Vale through the lobby of Valecrest Capital. Employees stopped typing. Phones lifted instantly. Whispers spread like wildfire. "That's him. Oh my God." They arrested Adrian Vale. The billionaire who once appeared on magazine covers now stumbled across the marble floor in wet handcuffs while strangers recorded his humiliation like entertainment. Adrian tried pulling free. "There's been a mistake," he shouted. Nobody answered. Not the board members. Not the executives. Not even Damien Cross. Especially not Damien. Damien stood near the reception desk wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, his face carefully arranged into fake heartbreak. The loyal best friend. The trusted CFO. The man Adrian had trusted for more than 20 years. Damien slowly lowered his eyes as though disappointed. As though Adrian had betrayed him. And somehow, that hurt worse than the arrest itself. Then the lobby doors opened. A black luxury car stopped outside the building. Adrian's chest tightened instantly. Celeste. Thank God. For one desperate second, he believed his wife had come to stand beside him. The driver stepped out with an umbrella. Celeste Vale emerged slowly from the car wearing dark sunglasses and a cream-colored designer coat untouched by the storm. Elegant. Cold. Untouchable. Cameras immediately turned toward her. Adrian stepped forward desperately. Celeste. She stopped inches away from him. Rain soaked Adrian completely while she remained perfectly dry beneath the umbrella. For a moment, her expression almost softened. Almost. Then she spoke. "You should have seen this coming." Adrian froze. The words crushed something inside him. "Celeste, please." But she simply removed her wedding ring, dropped it into his trembling hand, and walked away. No tears. No hesitation. No goodbye. The car disappeared into the rain. And just like that, everything Adrian had built collapsed at once. Inside the lobby, near the elevators, an elderly janitor stood silently gripping a mop handle. Watching. Listening. His tired eyes filled with something that looked dangerously close to fear. Because unlike everyone else in that building, Samuel Grayson knew something. Something terrifying. And as federal agents shoved Adrian into the vehicle outside, Samuel whispered quietly to himself. They finally destroyed him. If you love emotional betrayal stories filled with shocking twists and satisfying revenge, subscribe right now because this story gets far darker than you think. And trust me, the janitor knows far more than anyone realizes. 3 months earlier, Adrian Vale stood inside the top-floor office of Valecrest Capital overlooking Manhattan through walls of glass. Everything below looked tiny from up there. Cars, people, problems. That was the dangerous thing about success. It convinces you you're untouchable. At 48 years old, Adrian had built one of the most successful financial technology companies in America. News stations called him visionary. Investors called him genius. Employees called him unstoppable. But nobody saw the exhaustion hiding underneath the expensive suits and confident interviews. Because Adrian hadn't been born powerful. He came from nothing. His father abandoned the family when Adrian was 11 years old. His mother worked double shifts at diners just to keep the lights on. Some nights Adrian pretended he wasn't hungry so his younger sister could eat the last piece of bread in the apartment. Pain changes people. For Adrian, it created ambition. By 16, he worked construction during the day and studied business books at night. At 27, he launched a tiny software startup from a cramped apartment with broken heating and stained carpets. People laughed at him back then, until they stopped laughing. Because Adrian kept winning. Year after year, deal after deal, failure after failure after failure, until finally, success arrived. And when it did, it arrived violently. Valecrest Capital exploded into a billion-dollar empire within 8 years. Adrian became one of the youngest financial CEOs in the country. Magazine covers, private jets, luxury homes, television interviews. Everything he once dreamed about became reality. But success doesn't just attract admiration. It attracts hunger. And the hungriest people are usually the ones standing closest to you. Big night tonight. Adrian turned as Damien Cross entered the office carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. Adrian smiled immediately. Damien wasn't just his CFO. He was family. They met during college after both losing an investment competition to richer students with better connections. They built everything together after graduation. Every risk. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night. Where Adrian was emotional, Damien was controlled. Where Adrian trusted people, Damien analyzed them. Together, they became unstoppable. Or at least that's what Adrian believed. Damien handed him a glass. To the merger, Damien said. Adrian clinked glasses with him. The merger would double Valecrest Capital's value overnight. It was the biggest financial move in company history. We actually did it, Adrian laughed softly. Damien smiled. But something about the smile looked strange. Tight. Forced. Cold. Adrian didn't notice. Because betrayal never arrives looking like betrayal. It arrives smiling. You nervous? Damien asked casually. About becoming richer? Adrian laughed. Not really. Damien stared into his whiskey. Funny thing about money, he murmured. It changes who survives. Adrian frowned slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Damien immediately smiled again. Nothing. Just tired. But for a split second, something dark passed through his eyes. Something Adrian completely missed. That night, Adrian and Celeste attended a luxury charity gala attended by celebrities, politicians, and billionaires. Cameras exploded the second they entered. They looked perfect together. The powerful billionaire CEO and his glamorous wife. But perfection is usually performance. Celeste smiled for cameras beautifully while gripping Adrian's arm. But the moment reporters looked away, her smile vanished instantly. You promised this merger would slow things down, she whispered sharply. Adrian kept smiling for nearby cameras. It will. That's what you said last year. Celeste, you're never home anymore. Adrian exhaled heavily. We've talked about this. No, she replied quietly. You avoid talking about it. A reporter suddenly approached them. Mr. Vale, one photo please. Instantly both smiled again like a flawless couple. Flash, flash, flash. Then the reporter left, and the smiles disappeared immediately. Adrian lowered his voice. I'm building our future. Celeste looked directly into his eyes. No, she said coldly. You're building yours. Then she walked away into the crowd before he could answer. Adrian watched her disappear with frustration burning inside him. Lately, everything between them felt distant. Cold. Like two actors trapped inside a marriage neither understood anymore. But Adrian convinced himself it was temporary. Stress. Pressure. Marriage goes through seasons. Right? Wrong. Because while Adrian was busy protecting the empire, the people closest to him were preparing to steal it. Near midnight, Adrian returned to Valecrest Capital to retrieve merger documents. The building was mostly empty except for cleaning staff. As he entered the lobby, he noticed Samuel Grayson slowly mopping near the elevators. Most executives ignored Samuel completely. To them, he was invisible, just an old janitor. But Adrian always greeted him. Samuel, Adrian smiled tiredly. You're still here. Samuel chuckled softly. Somebody has to keep this palace clean. Adrian laughed, then noticed Samuel coughing heavily. His smile faded immediately. You okay? Just old age catching up with me. You see a doctor yet? Samuel avoided eye contact. Doctors cost money. Without hesitation, Adrian reached into his wallet and handed him several $100s. Samuel's eyes widened. Mr. Vale, I can't take this. Yes, you can. But sir, go see the doctor, Samuel. The old janitor stared at the money emotionally. Nobody inside that building treated him with kindness. Nobody except Adrian. And sometimes, the smallest kindness changes everything. Adrian headed toward the elevator. But just before the doors closed, Samuel spoke again. Mr. Vale? Adrian turned. Samuel hesitated strangely, almost nervous. You ever feel like something bad is coming? Adrian gave a tired smile. Every day. The elevator doors closed. Samuel watched them silently, then slowly turned toward the dark executive hallway upstairs, toward Damien Cross's office. And fear appeared across his face. Real fear. 2 weeks later, everything exploded. Federal agents stormed Valecrest Capital at exactly 6:13 in the morning. Employees screamed. Computers were seized. Phones confiscated. News helicopters circled above the building like vultures. The accusations spread online within minutes. Fraud, money laundering, embezzlement, hidden offshore accounts. Over $2 billion missing. Adrian sat frozen inside the boardroom while investigators dumped financial records across the table. None of it made sense. These transfers originated from your executive authorization, one investigator said firmly. That's impossible. Your signatures are attached to every transaction. I didn't move any money. Damien sat nearby pretending to look devastated. This can't be happening, Damien muttered. But inside, he was perfectly calm, because this had been planned for years. Every forged document, every fake authorization, every hidden shell company, every stolen dollar. Years of preparation, years of manipulation, and Adrian never saw any of it coming. The board voted to remove Adrian as CEO before noon. Unanimously. Not one person defended him, not even Damien. Especially not Damien. "We are shocked and heartbroken," Damien told reporters outside the building. His voice sounded emotional. "Adrian was like a brother to me." Adrian watched the interview from inside a federal vehicle with disbelief burning through him. Damien looked sincere, convincing, like a loyal friend betrayed by someone he loved. It was the performance of a lifetime, and everyone believed him. By evening, Adrian's accounts were frozen. Investors abandoned him. The company's stock collapsed. Social media destroyed him nonstop. Greedy billionaire exposed. Another corrupt CEO. Lock him up. People who once begged for his attention now mocked him publicly for entertainment. But none of that compared to what waited at home. The mansion felt strangely quiet when Adrian walked inside. Too quiet. Then he climbed upstairs and froze. Suitcases lined the bedroom floor. Closet doors stood open. Drawers emptied. Celeste was leaving. "No," Adrian whispered weakly. Celeste continued packing expensive jewelry into designer cases without looking at him. "You're really doing this right now?" She finally turned toward him, and there was no love left in her eyes. Only irritation. "I can't stay here, Adrian. You think I stole that money? I think you got caught." The words hit like bullets. "I'm your husband." "You were." Adrian stared at her in disbelief. 20 years together. Gone in seconds. "What happened to us?" he asked quietly. Celeste laughed bitterly. "You stopped noticing me years ago." "That's not true. You loved that company more than anything else." Adrian stepped closer desperately. "Celeste, please. I can fix this." But then she said something strange. Something terrifying. "You can't fix what's already finished." Finished. The way she said it made Adrian's stomach tighten. Like she knew something. Before he could think deeper about it, Celeste grabbed her suitcase and walked toward the door. Then stopped. Without turning around, she whispered, "You really should have paid attention to the people around you." And then she left. Adrian stood alone inside the massive mansion while silence swallowed the room whole. For the first time in decades, he felt truly afraid. Because deep down, this no longer felt like bad luck. It felt planned. And somewhere inside the empty Valecrest building, an old janitor sat alone in the dark, carrying a secret powerful enough to destroy everyone. Adrian Vale sat alone in the dark staring at his phone while rain tapped softly against the apartment window. No calls. No messages. No support. 3 months earlier, people waited weeks for a meeting with him. Now nobody even answered his texts. That was the brutal truth about power. Most people don't love you. They love your position. And once the position disappears, so do they. The tiny apartment smelled like dust and old carpet. A massive downgrade from the mansion Celeste had abandoned without emotion. Adrian leaned back slowly and closed his eyes. His entire life replayed inside his head like punishment. The company, the betrayal, the arrest. Celeste dropping her wedding ring into his hand like their marriage meant nothing. And worst of all, Damien's face. That fake sympathy. That performance. Something about it kept bothering him. Because the more Adrian thought about everything, the less it made sense. Damien controlled most financial systems inside Valecrest Capital. Damien approved international transfers. Damien supervised offshore compliance teams. So how had investigators found nothing connected to him? How had every single trail somehow led only to Adrian? Unless Adrian sat upright suddenly. No, it couldn't be. Could it? Before he could think deeper, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Adrian answered cautiously. "Hello." A quiet older voice replied. "Mr. Vale, it's Samuel." Adrian frowned immediately. "The janitor?" Samuel chuckled softly. "Still a janitor, yes." Adrian sat forward. "How did you get this number?" "You gave it to me 2 years ago. Told me to call if I ever needed help." Adrian rubbed his face tiredly. Right. He barely remembered. "You okay, Samuel?" There was silence. Then Samuel spoke quietly. "I think we should talk." An hour later, Adrian arrived outside Valecrest Capital. The once powerful headquarters now looked cold and unfamiliar. News vans were gone. The crowds disappeared. Only silence remained. Samuel waited near the side entrance wearing his old gray maintenance uniform. The elderly man looked nervous. Very nervous. You shouldn't be here, Adrian said carefully. Samuel glanced around before replying. Neither should you. They entered through a maintenance hallway and eventually reached the empty lobby. The massive room that once overflowed with executives and investors now echoed with loneliness. Adrian stared at the floor silently. I built this place, he murmured. Samuel nodded sadly. And they erased you from it in 1 week. The words hurt because they were true. Adrian sat heavily near the reception area. Samuel remained standing with both hands gripping his mop handle tightly, like he was debating whether to speak. Finally, Adrian looked up. You said you wanted to talk. Samuel swallowed hard, then asked quietly, Did you really steal that money? Adrian looked directly into his eyes. No. Samuel stared at him for several long seconds. And for the first time since the scandal began, someone believed him. The old janitor slowly nodded. I knew it. Adrian's chest tightened. Knew what? Samuel hesitated. Fear spread across his face. The kind of fear people carry when they've stayed silent too long. I saw things, Samuel whispered. Adrian stood immediately. What things? Samuel looked toward the elevators nervously. Not here. Samuel led Adrian deep into the lower maintenance section beneath the building. Old storage rooms lined the hallways. Dust covered everything. Nobody ever came down there, which made it perfect for secrets. Finally, Samuel unlocked a tiny break room and shut the door behind them. Then he reached inside an old locker and pulled out a worn notebook. Adrian frowned. What is that? Samuel held the notebook carefully. Insurance. Adrian took it slowly. Inside were handwritten dates, times, transaction notes, account numbers. Adrian's confusion deepened. What am I looking at? Samuel sat down heavily. About 4 years ago, Mr. Cross started staying late almost every night. Adrian frowned. Damien. Samuel nodded. At first I thought nothing of it. Executives work late. But eventually, strange things started happening. What things? Samuel looked down at his hands. I'd clean his office after midnight. Sometimes he'd panic when he saw me. Other times he'd slam laptop screens shut the second I entered. Adrian's heartbeat slowly increased. One night, Samuel continued quietly, I saw large money transfers open across his computer screen. Adrian stared at him. What kind of transfers? Millions. Silence filled the room instantly. Samuel continued carefully. At first I thought maybe it was normal business. But then I noticed the names. Adrian stepped closer. What names? Shell companies. Adrian's stomach tightened. Samuel opened the notebook again. I started writing things down because something felt wrong. Why didn't you report it? Samuel laughed sadly. To who? I'm a janitor. The words landed heavily between them. Because deep down, he was right. Nobody listened to people like Samuel. Invisible people see everything because nobody notices they're there. Adrian slowly sat down again. Did you ever hear Damien mention me? Samuel hesitated, then nodded slowly. One night, I heard him arguing on speakerphone. Adrian's chest tightened instantly. With who? Samuel looked uncomfortable. I think your wife. Adrian froze. What? Samuel swallowed hard. I couldn't hear everything clearly, but I remember one sentence exactly. The old janitor looked directly into Adrian's eyes. Once Adrian signs the merger papers, everything transfers automatically. Silence. Absolute silence. Adrian felt like the air had vanished from the room. No, he whispered. Samuel nodded sadly. I remember because your name caught my attention. Adrian stood and backed away slowly. His mind raced violently. The merger. The offshore accounts. The timing. Celeste leaving immediately. Damien acting too prepared. Too calm. Too perfect. Oh my God. This wasn't random. This wasn't panic. This wasn't corporate fraud. It was betrayal. Carefully planned betrayal. For years. Adrian suddenly slammed his fist against the table. Damn it. Samuel flinched slightly. They used me. Adrian whispered angrily. They used my own company. His breathing became uneven. 20 years. 20 years Damien stood beside him pretending to be family while quietly building a trap around him. And Celeste, his wife, had known. Maybe longer than Damien. Maybe from the beginning. The realization shattered something inside him. Not because of the money. Not even because of the company. But because the two people he trusted most had looked him in the eyes every day while planning his destruction. That kind of betrayal changes a person forever. If you're still watching, comment, truth always returns below, because what Adrian discovers next will expose a betrayal bigger than anyone imagined. And don't forget to like the video if you want to see justice served before this story ends. Over the next several days, Adrian and Samuel met secretly every night. And slowly, the truth became horrifying. Samuel's notes revealed patterns hidden inside years of transactions. The same shell companies appeared repeatedly. Small amounts at first, then larger, then massive. Damien had been siphoning money slowly for years without triggering suspicion. But that wasn't even the worst part. He needed your authorization levels, Samuel explained quietly one night. Adrian rubbed his exhausted face. So he framed me. Samuel nodded. But carefully. The old janitor opened another page inside the notebook. Every major transfer happened near important company events. Adrian stared downward. The merger, investor meetings, acquisitions, moments when he signed dozens of documents daily. Damien had buried fraudulent authorizations among legitimate paperwork, which meant Adrian unknowingly approved his own destruction. The realization made him physically sick. Meanwhile, online hatred against Adrian continued growing daily. News stations called him greedy, corrupt, heartless. Former friends publicly condemned him to protect their own reputations. Even charities removed his name from donation plaques. It was like the world had decided he no longer deserved humanity. One night, Adrian finally broke down. I gave everything to that company, he whispered emotionally. Samuel sat quietly beside him. I missed birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. His voice cracked. And for what? Samuel remained silent. Because sometimes pain doesn't need advice. It just needs someone willing to stay. After several moments, Adrian laughed bitterly. You know the crazy part? What? You're the only person who didn't leave. Samuel looked surprised, then smiled sadly. Rich people never looked at me twice, he said softly. Except you. Adrian lowered his eyes. You bought me medicine when I couldn't breathe properly. Helped pay for my granddaughter's school books. Asked how I was doing every morning. Samuel shook his head slowly. You treated me like a human being. Adrian felt emotion tightening inside his chest. Because all his life, he believed success came from intelligence, power, money, connections. But now, at the lowest moment of his life, the only person standing beside him was the man everyone else ignored. And somehow that mattered more than everything he lost. 3 nights later, everything became dangerous. Adrian exited Samuel's apartment building after midnight when he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The headlights turned on immediately. His stomach tightened. The vehicle slowly pulled away behind him. Following him, Adrian kept walking casually. The SUV kept moving. Cold fear crawled through his chest. Then suddenly, the vehicle accelerated hard, straight toward him. Adrian! Samuel shouted from behind. Tires screamed violently. Adrian jumped backward seconds before the SUV slammed onto the curb where he had been standing. Then it sped away into the darkness. Samuel rushed toward him, breathing heavily. Are you hurt? Adrian stared after the disappearing SUV with adrenaline exploding through his veins. That wasn't random. Someone knew. Someone knew they were investigating. And there was only one person desperate enough to silence them. Damien Cross. For the first time since the scandal began, Adrian realized the truth could get them killed. And somewhere across the city, Damien sat inside a penthouse office calmly pouring himself another glass of whiskey while Celeste watched nervously from the window. He knows something, she whispered. Damien's expression darkened. Then we handle it. Celeste turned toward him slowly. You said this was over. It was supposed to be. Fear crept into her voice. What if Samuel talks? Damien took a slow sip of whiskey, then smiled coldly. Nobody listens to janitors. But this time, he was wrong. Adrian Vale couldn't sleep anymore. Every sound outside his apartment made him alert. Every passing car felt dangerous. Because now he understood the truth. This wasn't just betrayal. It was war. And Damien Cross would destroy anyone standing between him and the empire he stole. The near hit with the SUV changed everything. Samuel sat quietly inside Adrian's apartment the following night while old rain tapped softly against the windows. The elderly janitor looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. You should leave the city for a while, Adrian said carefully. Samuel shook his head immediately. No, Samuel. I stayed quiet too long already. Adrian exhaled heavily. You could have died last night. Samuel gave a weak smile. At my age, death doesn't scare me much anymore. Then his expression changed. But regret does. Silence filled the room. Adrian stared at the old man emotionally. All his life, he had surrounded himself with powerful people. Executives, politicians, investors. Yet the bravest person he had ever met was a 72-year-old janitor everyone ignored. Samuel slowly reached into his coat pocket. I remembered something. Adrian frowned. What? Samuel pulled out a tiny rusted key. Adrian stared at it confused. What is that? Samuel looked directly into his eyes. The reason Damien's finally scared. 2 hours later, they stood inside the underground archive section beneath Valecrest Capital. The lower storage levels had been abandoned for years after the company digitized most records. Dust covered the walls. The lights flickered weakly overhead. Adrian's heartbeat pounded harder with every step. You sure this place still exists? He whispered. Samuel nodded. Damien used to come down here personally. Why? Because some people trust paper more than computers. They stopped outside an old metal door hidden behind maintenance shelves. Samuel inserted the rusted key slowly. Click. The lock opened. Adrian's chest tightened instantly. Inside the room sat dozens of storage boxes stacked floor to ceiling. Damien's private archive. Help me search, Samuel whispered urgently. They moved quickly. Old transaction files. Transfer records. Investment reports. Most looked ordinary. Until Adrian suddenly froze. Oh my God. Samuel turned immediately. What? Adrian slowly lifted a thick folder labeled Vanguard Holdings International. One of the shell corporation's investigators claimed Adrian secretly controlled. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside sat transfer approvals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And attached beneath them, forgery templates, digital signature replications, authorization copies, proof, actual proof. Adrian's breathing became uneven. He forged everything. Samuel moved beside him. Then his expression darkened further. There's more. He opened another folder. This one contained luxury property purchases transferred through hidden offshore accounts. The buyer name made Adrian's blood run cold. Celeste Vale. Adrian stared silently at the documents. Luxury penthouses, vacation villas, secret bank transfers. For years, Celeste had been quietly receiving stolen money while pretending to be his loyal wife. The betrayal hit differently now. More personal, more disgusting. Because she hadn't left after he lost everything. She left because the plan was complete. Adrian lowered himself into a chair slowly. 20 years together. Birthdays, vacations, anniversaries, family photos. All poisoned now. Every memory suddenly felt fake. Samuel placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry. Adrian laughed weakly. No, now I finally understand. His voice cracked slightly. I was never losing my marriage. He looked down at the documents painfully. I lost it years ago. I just didn't know. The words shattered the room into silence. Then suddenly, footsteps. Both men froze instantly. Someone was outside. Samuel's eyes widened. We weren't followed. The footsteps grew louder. Closer. Adrian quickly shut off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the archive room completely. The door handle slowly moved. Once. Twice. Then stopped. Adrian barely breathed. Samuel gripped the edge of the shelf tightly. Several endless seconds passed. Then finally, the footsteps disappeared. Adrian exhaled shakily. We need to go? Now. They grabbed the most important files and hurried through the underground corridors. But as they reached the parking structure, headlights exploded on. 3 black SUVs blocked the exit. Adrian froze. Samuel whispered, "Oh no." The SUV doors opened. Large men stepped out wearing dark jackets. Not police. Not security. Something worse. One man cracked his neck slowly. Mr. Cross wants his files back. Adrian immediately pushed Samuel behind him. Run. The men rushed forward. Adrian swung the metal archive box hard into the nearest attacker's face. Crack. The man collapsed instantly. Samuel stumbled toward the stairwell while Adrian fought desperately. Another attacker slammed him against a vehicle. Pain exploded across his ribs. A third man grabbed the documents. No. Adrian roared. Adrenaline surged violently through him. He tackled the man to the concrete floor and ripped the files back seconds before Samuel shouted from the stairwell. Adrian. Sirens. Police sirens. The attackers cursed instantly. then sprinted back toward the SUVs before disappearing into the night. Adrian collapsed against a car, breathing heavily. Samuel rushed toward him. "You okay?" Adrian nodded painfully while gripping the documents tightly against his chest. "We got them." And for the first time since losing everything, hope returned. The following morning, Adrian walked into the Federal Investigations Office, carrying enough evidence to destroy Damian Cross forever. Agents stared at the boxes suspiciously. One investigator frowned. "Mr. Vale, you understand your credibility is damaged." Adrian placed the forged authorizations across the table calmly. "Then test the signatures." Silence filled the room as investigators reviewed the documents. Then Samuel stepped forward nervously. The old janitor looked tiny compared to the powerful federal agents surrounding him. But his voice never shook. "I saw Damian Cross moving money for years." The lead investigator frowned. "You witnessed illegal transfers?" Samuel nodded slowly. "And I wrote everything down." For the next 3 hours, Samuel told them everything. The late-night meetings, the shell companies, the merger setup, Celeste's involvement. Every detail, every date, every suspicion. The investigators listened carefully, and slowly, their expressions changed, because the story finally made sense. One forensic analyst entered the room carrying additional reports. "We tested the signatures." Everyone turned toward him. The analyst looked directly at Adrian. They were forged. Silence exploded across the room. One investigator immediately stood. "Give me warrants for Damian Cross and Celeste Vale right now." Adrian closed his eyes slowly. Finally, the truth was alive. If you're still watching, comment "Karma never misses" below, because Damian Cross is about to lose everything the same way he stole it. And don't forget to subscribe, because the ending of this story will stay with you long after the video ends. News exploded across the country 24 hours later. Breaking news: new evidence suggests Adrian Vale was framed. Federal investigation reopened. Valecrest CFO under criminal scrutiny. The same media that destroyed Adrian suddenly changed direction overnight. Because public loyalty follows power, and power was shifting again. Federal agents stormed Damian's penthouse before sunrise. This time, he was the one in handcuffs. Cameras flashed violently as agents escorted him outside. Reporters screamed questions nonstop. Did you frame Adrian Vale? Did Celeste Vale help steal company funds? Damian remained silent. But panic had already replaced his usual calm expression. Meanwhile, Celeste sat inside a luxury hotel suite watching the news with trembling hands. Her phone rang repeatedly. Lawyers, reporters, friends abandoning her. Exactly the way she abandoned Adrian. Karma moves slowly, but it arrives eventually. Then came the final blow. Federal investigators released the forged authorization evidence publicly. Everything collapsed instantly. Valecrest's board issued emergency statements. Investors turned against Damian overnight. Former allies vanished. The empire he stole began crumbling beneath him in real time. But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later inside federal court. Damian sat rigidly beside his attorneys while Adrian entered quietly with Samuel. The courtroom exploded into whispers. People stared at Adrian differently now. Not as a criminal, but as a victim. Damian finally looked at him directly for the first time in months. And there it was. Hatred. Pure hatred. You should have stayed quiet, Damian hissed. Adrian stared back coldly. You should have stayed loyal. The hearing began. Investigators presented transaction records, forgery evidence, shell company connections. Then Samuel testified. The elderly janitor walked slowly toward the witness stand while reporters watched silently. Damian looked almost amused. Like Samuel didn't matter. Like nobody would believe a janitor over a billionaire executive. Then Samuel began speaking, and the entire courtroom changed. He described every late-night transfer, every suspicious conversation, every hidden file, every moment Damian believed nobody important was watching. But the most powerful moment came near the end. The prosecutor asked softly, "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Samuel looked down briefly, then answered quietly, "Because people like me are invisible." The courtroom fell silent. Samuel's tired eyes slowly lifted toward Damian. But invisible people see everything. Even the judge looked emotional. Damian's confidence finally cracked. "You self-righteous old fool," he suddenly shouted. Gasps filled the courtroom. Damian stood violently, pointing at Adrian. "I built that company too. his face twisted with years of jealousy. Everything was always Adrian. Adrian the genius. Adrian the visionary. Spit flew from his mouth as security moved closer. I deserved that empire. And just like that, he confessed without realizing it. The courtroom exploded. Reporters rushed outside instantly. The story became national news within minutes. Damian Cross was arrested for conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, attempted murder, and financial crimes. Celeste accepted a plea deal to avoid prison. But she lost everything. Her status, her reputation, her luxury life, everything. Several days later, Adrian received a phone call. Celeste. He stared at the screen silently while it rang. And rang. And rang. Then finally, he declined the call. Not angrily. Not emotionally. Just peacefully. Because some doors should never reopen. 6 months later, sunlight filled a newly renovated community business center in Brooklyn. Children laughed downstairs. Small business owners attended free financial workshops. Families filled the building with life. A bronze plaque stood near the entrance. Samuel Grayson Community Center. Samuel stared at it emotionally. You didn't have to do this. Adrian smiled softly. Yes, I did. Samuel shook his head slowly. You rebuilt your life. Adrian looked around the center quietly. No. His voice softened. I rebuilt the right one this time. The old janitor's eyes watered slightly. For years, Samuel spent his life being ignored by powerful people. But now, people greeted him warmly, respected him, saw him, and somehow that mattered more than money ever could. As they stood near the entrance, a young employee accidentally bumped into Samuel. Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Grayson. Samuel smiled warmly. No harm done. The employee smiled back respectfully before walking away. Adrian noticed the emotion in Samuel's eyes immediately. You okay? Samuel nodded slowly. They see me now. Adrian looked at the old man quietly, then smiled. Good, he whispered. Because sometimes the people nobody notices are the ones holding the truth that changes everything. And sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover who is truly beside you all along. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. And tell me in the comments, who would stay beside you if you lost everything?